In the halls of the Crimson Crown, where the howls of ancient alphas echoed from stone walls and the weight of 1,000 years of dominance pressed down like the mountain peaks themselves, silence was the most dangerous sound of all. The Alpha King's heir had been born into this world of roars and commands, of growls that settled disputes and voices that shaped destiny, and he had heard none of it. Not the triumphant celebration that greeted his first breath, not the concerned whispers that followed when he failed to startle at thunderclaps or turn toward his father's booming voice. Not even the gentle lullabies his mother sang through tears she refused to let anyone see. For 3 years, the palace had tried everything. Healers who claimed divine favor, mages who promised miraculous cures, and ancient rituals performed under blood moons by wolves whose own greatness depended on their ability to fix what they deemed broken. Each failure deepened the shadows in King Aldrich's eyes. Each disappointed shake of a healer's head, another crack in the foundation of a dynasty built on strength. The child was perfect in every other way, strong, intelligent, bearing the unmistakable presence of an alpha born to rule. But in a world where leadership was measured by the power of one's voice and the ability to command through sound alone, a silent prince was seen as a walking contradiction, a flaw that enemies would exploit and subjects would question. What none of them understood, not the king with his unshakable certainty, not the healers with their limited vision, not the court with its whispered judgments, was that some truths could only be heard by those who had learned to listen with more than their ears. Deep in the servants' quarters, forgotten among the Omega attendants whose voices held no weight in matters of state, lived knowledge that predated their kingdom's rise to power, wisdom carried in calloused hands and hidden in worn cloth, passed down through generations of women who had been taught that survival meant concealing their gifts rather than revealing them. Tonight, as the palace slept fitfully under the weight of an uncertain future, that hidden wisdom would step into the light, and a kingdom would discover that the most powerful truths are often spoken in the language of silence, understood only by those brave enough to listen with their hearts instead of their prejudices. The heir was not broken. He was simply waiting for someone who knew how to reach him, not through the thunder of authority, but through the deeper resonance that connected all things, the ancient frequency that Omega hearts had always known how to hear. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The 3rd birthday of Prince Lyrian was meant to be a celebration. Instead, it had become another exercise in disappointment that echoed through the palace halls like a funeral dirge. Celine pressed herself against the stone wall outside the royal chambers, her servant's uniform rendering her invisible to the nobles who swept past in frustrated clusters, their voices low with the kind of gossip that shaped kingdoms and destroyed reputations. 3 years, she heard Lady Cordelia whisper to her companion, their silk gowns rustling as they paused near Celine's hiding spot. 3 years, and the boy still hasn't spoken a single word, doesn't even cry properly when he's hurt. The king grows more desperate by the day, came the hushed reply. They say he's considering bringing in healers from the Eastern Territories, even though their methods are questionable. Celine's heart clenched at the casual cruelty in their voices. She had watched Prince Lyrian from afar since his birth, had seen the confusion and pain that flickered in his bright amber eyes when people shouted at him, expecting responses he couldn't provide. The child wasn't broken. He was simply experiencing the world in ways that no one in the palace understood or bothered to learn about. Perhaps it's a mercy, Lady Cordelia continued, her voice dropping even lower. A deaf alpha could never hold the throne. Better to discover the weakness now than after enemies have taken advantage of it. The casual dismissal of a child's future made Celine's wolf snarl beneath her skin, but she remained motionless against the wall, knowing that revealing her presence would only result in punishment for eavesdropping. Omegas in the royal palace were meant to be seen rarely and heard never, invisible hands that maintained the grandeur while remaining beneath notice. The nobles moved on, their conversation shifting to other court gossip, leaving Celine alone with thoughts that had been growing more urgent with each passing day. In the deep pocket of her apron, wrapped in cloth that had been touched by 7 generations of Omega hands, lay something that might change everything, if she could find the courage to risk using it. The heavy wooden door to the royal chambers opened with a sound like breaking hearts, and Queen Isadora emerged with her usual expression of carefully controlled devastation. Even from a distance, Celine could see the toll that 3 years of failed hopes had taken on the Queen's beautiful features. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her golden hair had lost the lustrous shine that had once made her the envy of every woman in the kingdom. Behind her came a parade of the kingdom's most respected healers, their faces bearing the particular smugness of people who had been proven right in their predictions of failure. Master Aldwin, the royal physician, adjusted his elaborate robes with the satisfaction of someone whose reputation remained intact precisely because he had never promised miracles. "Your Majesty," he was saying as they passed Celine's position, "I must reiterate my professional opinion that further attempts at treatment are not only futile, but potentially harmful to the child's development. Some conditions are simply beyond mortal intervention. And what would you have me tell his father?" Queen Isadora's voice carried the dangerous quiet that preceded royal fury. "That we should simply accept that the heir to the Crimson Crown will never hear his people's voices or respond to their needs? I would suggest, Your Majesty, that perhaps it's time to consider alternative arrangements for the succession." Master Aldwin's words fell into silence so complete that even the torches seemed to stop flickering. "The king's younger brother, Prince Marcus, has 2 healthy sons who show every sign of developing into strong alphas." The sound Queen Isadora made was somewhere between a growl and a sob. "Get out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of you, get out before I forget myself entirely and show you exactly what a mother wolf is capable of when her cub is threatened." The healers fled with the hasty dignity of people who had pushed too far and knew it. When they were gone, Queen Isadora remained standing in the corridor, her shoulders shaking with the effort of maintaining composure that was costing her everything. This was Celine's moment. It had to be. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to step forward, to offer help that might be rejected, but had to be tried. Her hand closed around the object in her pocket, warm now from her body heat, almost pulsing with possibilities that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Your Majesty," she said softly, stepping out of the shadows. Queen Isadora whirled around, her eyes flashing with the golden light that preceded transformation. For a moment, Celine thought she might be attacked by a grieving mother whose control had finally snapped. Instead, the Queen's expression shifted to confusion as she took in Celine's modest servant attire and respectfully lowered gaze. "Who are you?" the Queen asked, though her tone had softened from fury to simple exhaustion. "I don't recognize you from the regular palace staff. I am Celine Moonweaver, Your Majesty. I work in the laundry and sometimes assist with cleaning the lower chambers." The lie came easily. Celine did indeed work in those areas, though her real duties were far more extensive than most people realized. I couldn't help overhearing what the healers said about Prince Lyrian." Queen Isadora's expression hardened again. "If you're here to offer empty consolations or meaningless platitudes about the god's will, you can save your breath. I've heard every possible variation on everything happens for a reason, and none of them bring my son any closer to the healing he needs. I'm not here to offer consolations, Your Majesty." Celine took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would either change everything or destroy her utterly. "I'm here because I might be able to help." The silence that followed was so profound that Celine could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Queen Isadora stared at her with an expression that cycled through disbelief, hope, and something approaching desperate fury. "Help," the Queen repeated flatly. "You, a servant whose name I don't even know, believe you can accomplish what the kingdom's most skilled healers have declared impossible." "Not impossible, Your Majesty, just misunderstood." Celine forced herself to meet the Queen's gaze directly, despite every protocol that demanded submission. "Prince Lyrian isn't broken. He doesn't need to be fixed. He needs to be reached in the way that works for him, not the way that works for everyone else." Queen Isadora's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "And you believe you understand my son better than trained physicians who have studied healing arts for decades? I believe, Your Majesty, that sometimes understanding comes from experience rather than education." Celine's hand moved to her pocket, feeling the warm weight of generations of hidden knowledge. "I know what it's like to be seen as lesser, to have people speak about you as if you're not there, to be dismissed because you don't fit into the narrow definitions of what's considered normal or valuable." The comparison hung between them like a bridge neither woman was sure she wanted to cross. Queen Isadora studied Celine's face with the intensity of someone trying to read prophecies written in foreign languages. "You're an Omega," the Queen said finally, as if the words explained everything about Celine's presumption and nothing about her potential. "Yes, Your Majesty," I am. Celine didn't try to deny or minimize what was obvious to anyone with functioning senses. And because I'm an Omega, I've learned to pay attention to things that others overlook. I've watched Prince Lyrian for 3 years, and I've seen things that no one else seems to notice. Such as the fact that he responds to vibrations through the floor when people walk nearby. Such as the way he turns toward movement, even when he can't hear the sounds that cause it. Such as how he calms when someone touches him gently, but becomes agitated when people try to force reactions through loud noises or sudden gestures. Queen Isadora had gone very still, her expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching wonder. You've been watching my son. Everyone in the palace has been watching Prince Lyrian, Your Majesty. But most of them have been watching for signs of weakness or failure. I've been watching for signs of how he actually experiences the world, rather than how we think he should. The distinction seemed to hit Queen Isadora like a physical blow. She pressed one hand to her throat and stared at Celine with eyes that were suddenly bright with unshed tears. The healers say there's nothing to be done, she whispered. They say his condition is permanent, unchangeable. They say many things that demonstrate their understanding of only one way of being in the world. Celine interrupted gently. But, Your Majesty, what if Prince Lyrian doesn't need to be changed? What if he needs to be understood? I don't understand the difference. Celine took another step closer, driven by desperation and hope in equal measure. Your Majesty, may I ask you something that might sound strange? Queen Isadora nodded, though wariness had returned to her expression. In all the attempts to heal Prince Lyrian, has anyone ever tried simply communicating with him? Not trying to make him hear or speak, but finding other ways to connect? Of course we've tried, the Queen began, then stopped, her expression growing thoughtful. We've tried to get him to respond to our voices, to react to sounds, but actual communication. She trailed off, staring at Celine with growing realization. You mean conversation, exchange, not just trying to make him acknowledge us. Exactly, Your Majesty. Communication doesn't require sound if both parties understand the language being used. Queen Isadora was quiet for so long that Celine began to fear she had overstepped beyond any possibility of forgiveness. When the Queen finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What kind of communication? This was the moment Celine had been both anticipating and dreading. Slowly, carefully, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the cloth-wrapped object that had been passed down through her maternal line for more generations than anyone could count. The fabric was soft with age and handling, stained with herbs and tears, and the touch of countless Omega hands. My great-great-grandmother was an Omega in service to the royal family 4 generations ago, Celine said, unwrapping the object with reverent fingers. She served during the reign of King Aldric's great-grandfather, and she learned things that have been forgotten by everyone except the Omegas who were tasked with preserving them. What emerged from the cloth was nothing impressive by royal standards, a simple sphere about the size of a child's fist, made from what appeared to be polished stone, inlaid with silver veins that caught the torchlight in strange ways. It looked ancient, well-handled, and completely unremarkable, except for the way it seemed to warm the air around it. What is it? Queen Isadora asked, though she made no move to touch the object. It's called a resonant stone, Celine replied, cradling it carefully in her palms. The old texts say they were created by the first wolves, back when the line between human and animal was thinner, and communication happened through means that went deeper than voice. Queen Isadora's expression had shifted to the particular skepticism reserved for objects that looked like they should be magical, but appeared entirely ordinary. A stone. Not just any stone, Your Majesty. This one has been attuned to the frequency that connects all wolves, regardless of their ability to hear traditional sounds. It resonates with the part of us that knows pack bonds, that feels connection across distances, that recognizes family and danger and love without needing words. Omega superstition, the Queen said, though there was less certainty in her voice than her words suggested. Perhaps, Celine agreed readily. Or perhaps the wisdom that Omegas have been preserving for centuries, while everyone else forgot that there were other ways to reach someone's wolf. She held the stone out toward Queen Isadora, who stared at it as if it might bite her. Your Majesty, what do you have to lose? The healers have declared the situation hopeless. The court is beginning to whisper about succession alternatives. In a few more years, the political pressure to name a different heir will become overwhelming. The brutal honesty of the statement made Queen Isadora flinch, but she didn't deny its accuracy. "If I'm wrong," Celine continued, "then you've wasted an hour on the foolish hopes of an Omega servant. But if I'm right, if you're right, then every healer in the kingdom has been approaching my son's condition from entirely the wrong direction for 3 years." Queen Isadora's voice held a mixture of hope and terror that spoke of someone who had been disappointed too many times to trust easily, but who couldn't afford not to try. "Your Majesty, would you like me to show you how it works?" The question hung between them like a door that could only be opened once. On one side lay everything Queen Isadora knew about healing and power and the proper order of things. On the other side lay possibilities that challenged every assumption the kingdom had made about strength, communication, and the nature of being whole. "Show me," the queen whispered. Celine nodded and turned toward the royal chambers, the resonance stone warm and somehow eager in her hands. Behind her, Queen Isadora followed with the careful steps of someone walking toward either salvation or disaster, unable to tell which, but no longer able to turn back. The chamber where Prince Lyrian spent his days was a monument to failed hopes. Toys designed to make noise lay scattered and ignored across expensive carpets. Musical instruments gathered dust on shelves too high for small hands to reach. Books filled with pictures but no words sat untouched on tables, as if the child had sensed their inadequacy for his particular needs. Prince Lyrian himself sat in the center of this wasteland of good intentions, building something complex and architecturally impossible with wooden blocks. He was a beautiful child, all golden hair and amber eyes, with the strong features that marked him unmistakably as his father's son. But there was a quality to his stillness that spoke of someone who had learned not to expect connection from the world around him. "Lyrian," Queen Isadora called softly, though she had learned not to expect any response. The child continued building, adding another block to his creation, with the focused intensity of someone whose entire attention was absorbed in the task at hand. It wasn't defiance. It was simply the reality of someone who existed in a world without sound. "Your Majesty," Celine said quietly, "may I try something?" Queen Isadora nodded, though her hands were clenched so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Celine moved slowly across the room, making sure her footsteps were heavy enough to create vibrations through the floor that Prince Lyrian would be able to feel. As she had expected, his head lifted when he sensed her approach, amber eyes tracking her movement with intelligent curiosity. Instead of approaching him directly, Celine settled onto the floor about 6 feet away from where he was playing. There, she unwrapped the resonance stone completely and held it cupped in both hands, closing her eyes and reaching for the part of herself that was more wolf than human. The stone warmed beneath her touch, and she felt the familiar sensation of connection that preceded pact communion, the deep resonance that allowed wolves to sense each other's emotions, to share thoughts and feelings without words, to know instantly whether someone approaching meant safety or danger. Prince Lyrian's reaction was immediate and profound. His eyes went wide, and he dropped the block he had been holding, his entire body orienting towards Celine with an intensity that made Queen Isadora gasp audibly. For the first time since his birth, the child looked like he was truly seeing another person rather than simply acknowledging their presence. "Hello, little prince," Celine said, though she wasn't speaking aloud. The words traveled through the connection the stone facilitated, reaching Prince Lyrian through channels that had nothing to do with ears or sound waves. "I'm Celine, and I've been waiting a very long time to meet you properly." Prince Lyrian's mouth fell open in amazement. His small hands reached toward her, not grasping but questioning, as if he was trying to understand how someone was finally speaking to him in a language he could hear. "You're not broken," Celine continued through the stone's resonance. "You're not damaged or incomplete or any of the things they've been saying about you. You're just different, and different doesn't mean less." The child's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. For 3 years, he had lived in a world where people spoke at him, but never to him, where communication was something that happened around him, but never included him. Now, for the first time, someone was having an actual conversation with him. "Mama," he said aloud, the word clear and perfect, despite years of apparent inability to speak. Queen Isadora made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, falling to her knees beside Celine as she stared at her son in wonder. "He can speak," she whispered. All this time he could speak. He could always speak, Your Majesty, Selene replied gently, maintaining her connection with Prince Lyrian while addressing his mother. He just needed someone to speak with him first, in a way that he could understand. Prince Lyrian crawled across the space between them, his movements urgent with 3 years of pent-up need for connection. When he reached Selene, he placed his small hands on either side of the resonant stone, and the sensation of pack bond intensified until even Queen Isadora could feel echoes of it. More, Prince Lyrian said through the stone's connection, the word reaching both women with crystalline clarity. Please, more talking. Oh, sweetheart, Queen Isadora breathed, reaching out to touch her son's face with trembling fingers. We can talk as much as you want, about anything you want, forever. Prince Lyrian turned his attention to his mother, and for the first time in his young life, he smiled at her with recognition and joy, rather than polite acknowledgement. The expression transformed his face from merely beautiful to radiant, and Queen Isadora broke down completely, gathering him into her arms while tears streamed down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered to Selene over her son's head. Thank you for giving me back my child. But Selene knew the real work was just beginning. The resonant stone had opened a door that had been closed for 3 years, but keeping it open would require changes that would challenge everything the kingdom believed about communication, power, and the value of different ways of being in the world. Outside the royal chambers, she could hear approaching footsteps, heavy boots that belonged to King Aldrich, accompanied by the lighter steps of courtiers and advisors who had no doubt come to witness yet another failed attempt at healing the broken prince. In moments, they would discover that Prince Lyrian had never been broken at all. He had simply been waiting for someone who knew how to listen with more than their ears, how to speak with more than their voice, how to recognize that communication was about connection rather than volume. The real test would come when the court had to confront the fact that an Omega servant had accomplished what their most skilled healers had declared impossible, and had done it using knowledge they had dismissed as superstition for generations. As the footsteps grew closer, and Prince Lyrian continued to chatter excitedly through the stone's connection, Selene prepared herself for the conversation that would either transform the kingdom's understanding of strength and wisdom, or destroy her for daring to challenge assumptions that had shaped their world for centuries. Either way, the silence that had trapped a prince was finally broken, and the real story was just beginning. The moment King Aldrich entered the royal chambers, the very air seemed to change. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and even Prince Lyrian's excited chatter through the resonant stone quieted to respectful whispers. Selene had never been this close to the Alpha King before, and the sheer force of his presence made her wolf want to bare its throat in submission, but it was the expression on his face that truly commanded attention. King Aldrich was a man who had learned to expect disappointment, whose features had been carved into permanent lines of controlled frustration by 3 years of failed hopes and dwindling possibilities. He entered the room prepared for another scene of medical futility, another group of healers shaking their heads while his son remained unreachable. Instead, he found his queen weeping with joy while their supposedly mute child babbled happily in her arms, and an Omega servant he'd never seen before holding what appeared to be a simple stone, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Isadora, he said, his voice carrying the particular caution of someone who had learned not to trust good news. What's happening here? Aldrich, Queen Isadora replied, her face radiant with tears and laughter. Our son is talking. Actually talking. Having conversations. Responding to communication. That's impossible. The king's interruption was flat. Final. The statement of someone who had heard too many false promises. Every healer in the kingdom has examined him. His condition is permanent. Papa! Prince Lyrian's voice rang out clear as crystal, causing King Aldrich to stumble backward as if he'd been physically struck. The child had turned in his mother's arms to face his father, and for the first time in his 3 years of life, his amber eyes held recognition that went beyond simple visual acknowledgement. He was seeing his father not as a large, imposing figure who made meaningless mouth movements, but as a person he could actually communicate with. He spoke, King Aldrich whispered, his legendary composure cracking like ice in spring. How is he speaking? Through this, Queen Isadora said, gesturing to the resonant stone that Selene still held carefully between her palms. This woman, Selene, she brought something that no one else even knew existed. King Aldrich's gaze shifted to Selene for the first time, and she felt the full weight of royal attention like a mountain settling on her shoulders. His eyes were the same amber as his son's, but where Prince Lyrian's held joy and wonder, the king's burned with something far more dangerous, the intensity of a man who needed answers and wouldn't accept anything less than complete truth. "You," he said, his voice carrying absolute command. "Explain. Now." Celine forced herself to stand, despite every instinct that screamed at her to prostrate herself before such overwhelming authority. The resonant stone pulsed warm in her hands, and she drew strength from its connection to Prince Lyrian, who was watching the exchange with intelligent curiosity. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Prince Lyrian isn't deaf. He hears everything, just not through the same channels that most people use. The resonant stone allows communication through the deeper connections that bind all wolves, the frequencies that exist below normal sound. Omega superstition," came a new voice from the doorway. Master Aldwin had arrived with several other court healers, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. "Your Majesty, I strongly advise against entertaining the delusions of servants who clearly seek to exploit your desperation." The insult hit Celine like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Prince Lyrian's voice cut through the tension with startling clarity. "Not superstition," the child said firmly, though he was speaking through the stone's connection rather than aloud. "Truth. She speaks truth." Every adult in the room went silent. Prince Lyrian had not only responded to the healer's dismissal, but had done so with a sophistication of language that suggested he'd been understanding conversations for far longer than anyone realized. "How long?" King Aldrich asked, his voice rough with emotion as he looked at his son. "How long have you been able to understand everything we've been saying?" "Always," Prince Lyrian replied through the stone, his young voice carrying a weight of loneliness that broke Celine's heart. "Always hearing feelings and thoughts, but nobody listening back. Until now. Until her." He pointed directly at Celine, and suddenly every gaze in the room was focused on her again, this time with mixtures of awe, suspicion, and something approaching fear. "This is unprecedented," Master Aldwin declared, his voice tight with the particular anger of an expert whose expertise had been thoroughly undermined. "Communication through mystical objects has no basis in established healing practices. We have no way of verifying the authenticity of what we're witnessing. You want verification?" King Aldrich's voice carried a dangerous edge as he moved closer to where Celine sat with the stone. "Ask him something. Something only he would know. Something we've never discussed in his presence." Master Aldwin's expression suggested he considered this exercise beneath his dignity, but he stepped forward nonetheless. "Very well. Your Highness, if you can truly understand and respond to communication, tell me what color your father's ceremonial cloak was during last month's winter solstice ceremony." It was a clever test. Prince Lyrian had been present at the ceremony, but the color of the cloak had never been mentioned aloud in his presence. If he could answer correctly, it would prove he had been observing and understanding far more than anyone realized. Prince Lyrian's response was immediate. "Dark blue with silver stars," he said through the stone's connection. And Papa looked sad because Mama didn't feel good and had to leave early. Queen Isadora gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. She had indeed felt unwell during the ceremony, and had excused herself before it concluded, a detail that had been carefully kept from public knowledge to avoid rumors about the Queen's health. That's correct," Master Aldwin admitted reluctantly. "Both the cloak and the observation about Her Majesty's early departure." "How?" King Aldrich asked, dropping to one knee beside his son with an expression of wonder that transformed his stern features completely. "How have you been understanding us all this time?" "Feelings have colors," Prince Lyrian explained patiently through the stone, as if describing something as obvious as the sunrise. "Words have shapes. Thoughts make music. I see what you mean, even when I can't hear what you say." The explanation sent a chill through Celine as she realized the implications of what Prince Lyrian was describing. He wasn't just hearing through alternative channels, he was perceiving reality through sensory combinations that went far beyond normal shifter abilities. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I think Prince Lyrian may be experiencing a condition that's extremely rare, but not unheard of in Omega medical texts. It's called synesthetic perception, when the mind processes different types of sensory information as if they were connected." "Meaning what exactly?" King Aldrich demanded. meaning that Prince Lyrian may actually be perceiving more than the rest of us, not less. He's processing emotional content, observational data, and communication intent through pathways that most people never access. The resonance stone doesn't cure a disability. It amplifies an ability that already existed. Master Aldwin scoffed loudly. Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to base medical understanding on the theories of an Omega servant with no formal training. This Omega servant, King Aldrich replied with deadly quiet, has accomplished more in one afternoon than every formally trained healer in my kingdom has managed in 3 years. I'm beginning to think formal training might be part of the problem rather than the solution. The insult struck the assembled healers like lightning, and Celine could see various expressions of outrage and indignation spreading through their ranks. Master Aldwin's face had gone red with humiliation, while several other court physicians looked ready to storm from the room entirely. Your Majesty, Master Aldwin said through gritted teeth, I must protest this elevation of folk remedies over established medical science. The royal heir's health is too important to be entrusted to the person who actually solved the problem, Queen Isadora interjected, her voice carrying steel beneath silk. To the individual who bothered to learn how our son actually experiences the world, instead of trying to force him to conform to limited expectations. Prince Lyrian had been following the conversation with growing distress, and suddenly his small voice cut through the adult tension with heartbreaking clarity. Please don't fight, he said through the stone's connection. Please don't be angry because of me. I don't want to cause trouble. The immediate silence that followed was profound. Every adult in the room had just been reminded that their debate was taking place in front of a 3-year-old child who blamed himself for the conflict his differences had created. King Aldrich was the first to respond, reaching out to gently cup his son's face in hands that shook with emotion. Lyrian, he said, speaking aloud while Celine made sure the stone carried his words through the deeper channels his son could access. You are not trouble. You are not a problem to be solved. You are my heir, my son, and the most important thing in my world. The only mistake here has been ours, for not learning how to reach you sooner. Prince Lyrian's smile was radiant as he absorbed his father's words, but it was what happened next that truly shocked the assembled court. The child reached out and placed his small hands on his father's chest, directly over the heart, and suddenly, King Aldrich's eyes went wide with amazement. I can feel, he whispered. I can feel what he's feeling. The connection, the stone amplifies natural pack bonds, Celine explained, watching the wonder spread across the king's features. Prince Lyrian has always been able to sense emotional connections. Now you can experience a shadow of what he perceives naturally. The revelation that the prince's condition might actually represent enhanced rather than diminished capabilities was clearly causing fundamental shifts in how everyone viewed the situation. Master Aldwin and the other healers looked increasingly uncomfortable as their basic assumptions were challenged, while Queen Isadora stared at her son with a mixture of pride and regret for the years they had wasted trying to fix something that was never broken. How many people know about these stones? King Aldrich asked, his practical mind already moving to questions of security and politics. Very few, Your Majesty. The knowledge has been preserved primarily among Omega families, passed down from mother to daughter for generations. Most people consider them folk tales or superstition. And you? The king's amber eyes fixed on Celine with intensity that made her feel transparent. Why did you risk bringing this forward? You could have been punished for presuming to offer medical advice to the royal family. It was the question Celine had been dreading, because the honest answer revealed far more about her own motivations than she was comfortable sharing. Because, Your Majesty, I know what it's like to be seen as less than whole due to circumstances beyond your control. I know what it feels like when people speak about you as if you're not present, when your value is measured only by how well you conform to narrow definitions of normal. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, fueled by years of accumulated frustration with a system that dismissed Omega wisdom as inherently inferior. Prince Lyrian deserved to have someone advocate for him who understood that being different doesn't mean being broken. He deserved to have someone recognize that his way of experiencing the world might be valuable rather than tragic. King Aldrich studied her face for a long moment, and Celine braced herself for punishment for speaking so boldly about royal matters. Instead, he surprised her completely. What's your full name and background? He asked. Celine Moonweaver, Your Majesty. I'm the daughter of Omega servants, granddaughter of Omega healers, great-granddaughter of the woman who served in the royal household during your great-grandfather's reign, the woman who preserved the knowledge of resonance stones through 4 generations of royal service. Yes, your majesty. King Aldrich nodded slowly, then turned to address the assembled healers with an expression that suggested momentous decisions were being made. Master Aldwin, you and your colleagues are dismissed from further treatment of Prince Lyrian. Your services will continue to be required for other medical matters throughout the kingdom, but my son's care will be handled differently going forward. The dismissal was delivered with royal authority that brooked no argument, but Master Aldwin clearly struggled with the humiliation of being replaced by an Omega servant. Your Majesty, he protested, surely you don't intend to place the prince's health in the hands of someone with no formal medical training. I intend, King Aldrich interrupted with finality, to place my son's well-being in the hands of the person who has demonstrated actual understanding of his needs, rather than theoretical knowledge that has proven useless. He turned back to Celine, and she felt the weight of royal favor settling over her like a cloak she had never expected to wear. Celine Moonweaver, I am appointing you as Prince Lyrian's primary companion and communication facilitator. You will have full access to the royal family, chambers prepared adjacent to the prince's quarters, and whatever resources you require to further develop his abilities and expand our understanding of his condition. The announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Several court physicians made sounds of outrage, while Queen Isadora smiled through tears that spoke of relief beyond measure. Your Majesty, Celine said carefully, I'm honored by your confidence, but I should mention that caring for Prince Lyrian will require significant changes to how the court approaches communication and interaction with him. Explain. The resonance stone is powerful, but it's most effective when used by someone who understands the deeper connections it facilitates. Teaching others to use it properly will take time, and some people may never be able to access the frequencies it amplifies. King Aldrich frowned, clearly recognizing the political implications of a communication method that only certain people could master. You're saying that interacting with my heir will require special training that not everyone can achieve. I'm saying, Your Majesty, that Prince Lyrian's gifts require people to expand their understanding of what communication can be. Traditional voice-based authority might not be the most effective way to reach him. The statement hung in the air like a sword over the kingdom's entire power structure. If the heir could only be effectively reached through methods that challenged conventional approaches to leadership and command, it could fundamentally alter how the monarchy functioned. Then we'll learn, King Aldrich said simply. Whatever it takes, however long it requires, we'll adapt our methods to work with his abilities rather than against them. Prince Lyrian's delighted laughter echoed through the stone's connection, and for the first time since his birth, the sound filled the royal chambers with joy rather than sorrow. As the dismissed healers filed out with varying degrees of displeasure, and the royal family began making plans for this new phase of Prince Lyrian's development, Celine felt the weight of what she had set in motion. The quiet Omega servant who had stepped forward with forbidden knowledge had just changed the course of a kingdom's future. But as she watched Prince Lyrian chattering excitedly to his parents through the stone's resonance, sharing 3 years of pent-up thoughts and observations with people who could finally hear him properly, she knew that every risk had been worthwhile. The silence that had trapped a prince was broken forever, and the real transformation was just beginning. 6 months after the resonance stone had shattered the silence surrounding Prince Lyrian, the Crimson Crown Palace hummed with changes that went far deeper than anyone had initially anticipated. What had begun as one Omega's desperate attempt to help a misunderstood child had evolved into a transformation that challenged the very foundations of how the kingdom operated. Celine stood in the newly created communication chamber, watching Prince Lyrian work with 3 other children who had been brought to the palace after their parents learned that the royal heir's condition was not a disability, but a different way of perceiving the world. The revelation that synesthetic perception might be more common than anyone realized had prompted families throughout the kingdom to seek evaluation for their own children who had been struggling with traditional educational and social approaches. Show them the colors again, Lyrian, called out Mira, a 7-year-old girl whose parents had thought she was mentally deficient because she insisted that numbers had personalities and letters tasted different depending on their context. Show them how my name looks when I'm happy versus when I'm sad. Prince Lyrian held the resonance stone, now one of several that Celine had helped create using knowledge preserved in Omega archives, and closed his eyes in concentration. Through the enhanced connection, the other children could perceive faint echoes of his synesthetic vision, experiencing for the first time how someone else might process the same reality through entirely different sensory channels. Mira Happy is yellow with sparkles around the edges, Prince Lyrian explained patiently, his communication skills having grown exponentially since gaining access to proper interaction. Mira Sad is dark blue, with heavy weight, that feels like winter mornings. The children nodded seriously, absorbing this lesson in alternative perception with the adaptability that made them excellent students for methods that challenged conventional understanding. What amazed Celine constantly was how naturally they accepted that different people might experience identical stimuli in completely different ways, an acceptance that many adults continued to struggle with. "Celine," came a familiar voice from the chamber's doorway. Queen Isadora entered with her usual grace, though the tension in her posture suggested this was not a social visit. "We need to discuss the council meeting." The monthly council meetings had become increasingly contentious as the implications of Prince Lyrian's gifts became more apparent. Traditional advisors struggled to adapt to communication methods that required emotional openness and intuitive understanding rather than hierarchical authority, while younger court members pushed for more radical changes to accommodate the growing population of synesthetic individuals being discovered throughout the kingdom. "What's the primary concern today, Your Majesty?" Celine asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Lord Commander Harrison is demanding objective verification of Prince Lyrian's fitness to inherit the throne," Queen Isadora replied, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "He's arguing that a ruler who requires special communication methods represents a security vulnerability that enemies could exploit." It was the argument Celine had been expecting since the day she first revealed the resonant stone's capabilities. Traditional power structures depended on clear hierarchies and predictable interaction patterns, both of which were challenged by Prince Lyrian's alternative approaches to leadership and communication. "And the king's position?" she asked carefully. "Aldrich is furious, but he's also practical. He knows that Harrison represents a significant faction of older nobles who genuinely believe that any deviation from traditional royal communication represents weakness that will invite invasion or rebellion." Through the stone's connection, Celine could feel Prince Lyrian's growing distress as he absorbed the emotional undercurrents of their conversation. Even at 3 years old, he understood that people were arguing about his worth and fitness, based on criteria that ignored his actual capabilities. "I want to go to the council meeting," Prince Lyrian announced suddenly, his young voice carrying determination that surprised both women. "I want to show them what I can really do." Queen Isadora and Celine exchanged glances that spoke volumes about the political complexity of such a demonstration. Prince Lyrian's abilities were remarkable, but they required people to abandon preconceptions about communication and authority, something that many council members seemed constitutionally incapable of doing. "Lyrian, sweetheart," Queen Isadora said gently, "council meetings are very formal, and the people there might not understand your gifts the way your friends here do." "And they need to learn," Prince Lyrian replied, with the stubborn certainty that seemed to be a family trait. "Papa says I'm going to be king someday, but how can I be king if the important people won't listen to me?" The question struck at the heart of the dilemma that had been growing more acute with each passing month. Prince Lyrian was demonstrating remarkable leadership potential, but his methods challenged centuries of precedent about how royal authority was established and maintained. "Your Majesty," Celine said carefully, "perhaps Prince Lyrian has a point. The council's concerns about his fitness might be best addressed through direct demonstration rather than theoretical arguments." Queen Isadora looked skeptical. "You think exposing him to their prejudices and hostility will somehow convince them of his capabilities?" "I think, Your Majesty, that Prince Lyrian's gifts are most apparent when he's solving actual problems, rather than performing for skeptics. What if we structured the demonstration around something practical, rather than theatrical?" Before Queen Isadora could respond, commotion erupted outside the communication chamber. Raised voices, running footsteps, and the particular urgency that accompanied genuine emergencies. Through the stone's connection, Celine felt Prince Lyrian's immediate alertness as his enhanced senses detected distress that the adults were only beginning to perceive. "Something's wrong in the stables," Prince Lyrian announced, rising to his feet with an expression of concern that seemed far too mature for his young face. "The horses are scared, and Master Willem is hurt." Queen Isadora stared at her son in amazement. "How can you possibly know that from here?" Fear has a smell that travels through the stone connections, Prince Lyrian explained matter-of-factly. And pain makes sounds that regular ears can't hear, but I can feel through the vibrations. As if summoned by his words, a breathless servant appeared in the doorway, with news that confirmed every detail of Prince Lyrian's remote diagnosis. "Your Majesty," the servant gasped, "there's been an accident in the royal stables. Master Willem was kicked by one of the new stallions, and several horses have become agitated and dangerous. The head groom is requesting immediate assistance." Queen Isadora looked from the servant to her son with an expression that cycled through amazement, pride, and something approaching awe. "How did you know?" she whispered. "I always know when people need help," Prince Lyrian replied simply. "The stone makes it easier to reach them, but I could feel it before, too. I just couldn't tell anyone because nobody was listening properly." The revelation that Prince Lyrian might have been perceiving and attempting to respond to emergencies throughout his early childhood, without any means of communicating his awareness, sent chills through Celine's understanding of what the past 3 years had cost him. "Your Majesty," she said urgently, "this might be exactly the demonstration the Council needs to see. Not a formal presentation of Prince Lyrian's abilities, but a real-time example of how his gifts can serve the kingdom." Queen Isadora nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "You're suggesting we invite the Council to observe him responding to an actual crisis. I'm suggesting we let Prince Lyrian show them what leadership looks like when it's based on genuine perception and empathetic response, rather than traditional authority. Can we go help Master Willem now?" Prince Lyrian interrupted, his young voice carrying the impatience of someone who understood that discussion was consuming time that could be used for problem-solving. "He's getting more scared, and that's making the horses more upset." His matter-of-fact assessment of a developing crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of practical leadership that conventional training couldn't teach. Prince Lyrian wasn't concerned with protocol or proper procedures. He was focused on identifying problems and implementing solutions as efficiently as possible. "Yes," Queen Isadora decided, "we can go help Master Willem. And I think we should invite some observers to witness how you handle emergency situations." As they made their way toward the royal stables, Queen Isadora sent messages requesting the immediate presence of Lord Commander Harrison and several other council members. The invitation was phrased as an opportunity to observe the prince's daily activities rather than a formal demonstration, but the underlying challenge was clear enough. The royal stables were in chaos when they arrived. Master Willem sat against a hay bale, with his arm cradled against his chest, his face pale with pain and shock. 3 of the new stallions paced frantically in their stalls, their agitation feeding off each other's distress in a cycle that was making the entire facility increasingly dangerous. "Your Majesty," Master Willem called out when he spotted Queen Isadora, "I'm afraid I've made a mess of things. The new horses are more skittish than we anticipated, and my injury has left the staff short-handed during a critical training period." Prince Lyrian surveyed the scene with the focused attention of someone analyzing a complex problem. Through the resonance stone's connection, Celine could feel him processing multiple layers of information: emotional states, physical distress, environmental factors, and relationship dynamics between humans and animals. "The brown stallion is the leader," Prince Lyrian announced confidently. "He's scared because he doesn't understand the new place yet, and the others are copying his feelings. Master Willem's pain is making him nervous too, which makes the horses more nervous." His analysis was delivered with the clinical precision of an experienced crisis manager, despite coming from a 3-year-old child who had never received formal training in animal behavior or emergency response. "What do you recommend, Your Highness?" asked the head groom, who had learned to respect Prince Lyrian's insights during previous visits to the stables. "First, someone needs to help Master Willem so his pain stops frightening the horses. Then I need to talk to the brown stallion and explain that this is a safe place where horses are cared for properly." The practical approach to problem-solving impressed Celine, but it was Prince Lyrian's next statement that demonstrated the true sophistication of his thinking. "After that, we should introduce the new horses to the older ones gradually, so they can learn the stable's social rules from horses who already understand them. Human explanations won't work as well as horse demonstrations." Lord Commander Harrison arrived just in time to hear this assessment, and Celine watched his expression shift from skeptical dismissal to grudging interest as he absorbed the implications of what Prince Lyrian was proposing. "Your Highness," Harrison said carefully, "you believe you can communicate directly with agitated horses?" I can feel what they're feeling and share what I'm feeling, Prince Lyrian corrected patiently. Communication doesn't always need words, if both sides understand the same emotional language. To demonstrate his point, Prince Lyrian approached the stall, containing the most agitated stallion, a magnificent but clearly terrified animal that had been pacing frantically since their arrival. Instead of attempting to assert dominance or control, the prince simply stood quietly beside the stall door and held the resonant stone in both hands. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The stallion's frantic pacing slowed, then stopped entirely as he oriented toward Prince Lyrian with obvious curiosity. Within minutes, the horse was calm enough to approach the stall door, eventually allowing Prince Lyrian to touch his muzzle through the bars. He says his name is Thunder, and he misses his old herd, Prince Lyrian reported to the amazed observers. He's worried that the humans here might be cruel like the ones at his previous home, but I told him that Papa's horses are always treated kindly. Lord Commander Harrison stared at the scene with an expression that suggested fundamental reconsiderations were taking place in his understanding of royal capability and leadership methods. How is this possible? He asked quietly. The same way all communication is possible, Celine replied, maintaining her connection to Prince Lyrian while addressing the growing audience of nobles and court officials. Through shared understanding, empathy, and the willingness to meet others where they are, rather than demanding they conform to your expectations. As Prince Lyrian continued working with the horses, calming fears, facilitating introductions, and coordinating with the stable staff to implement solutions that addressed both immediate safety concerns and long-term integration goals, the assembled council members witnessed leadership that bore little resemblance to traditional models, but achieved results that exceeded anything conventional Aches could have accomplished. Your Majesty, Lord Commander Harrison said to Queen Isadora, his voice carrying new respect, I may have been premature in my concerns about Prince Lyrian's fitness for future leadership responsibilities. Oh? Queen Isadora's tone was carefully neutral, though Celine could feel her satisfaction through the stone's emotional resonance. Traditional royal training focuses on authority, control, and the ability to impose one's will upon others, Harrison admitted reluctantly. But what I'm witnessing suggests that Prince Lyrian's approach to leadership might be more effective than conventional methods, not less. Prince Lyrian had moved on to helping Master Willem, using the stone's amplified empathy to locate exactly where the injury was causing pain, and coordinating with the arriving healers to ensure their treatment was as comfortable as possible. His bedside manner was remarkable for someone so young, patient, gentle, and somehow capable of providing reassurance that transcended verbal communication. He sees problems that others miss, Harrison continued, responds to crises before they fully develop, and achieves cooperation through understanding rather than intimidation. Those are valuable skills in any leader. They're especially valuable in a king, King Aldrich's voice added from behind them. The Alpha King had arrived quietly and had been observing his son's crisis management with obvious pride. A ruler who can perceive his people's true needs and respond with genuine empathy rather than assumed authority. As the stable situation was fully resolved and the various observers began to disperse, Celine found herself reflecting on how completely the day had transformed the political landscape surrounding Prince Lyrian's future. What had begun as a medical consultation had evolved into a fundamental redefinition of what strength and leadership could look like. Celine, King Aldrich called as the crowd thinned. Walk with me. They strolled through the palace gardens while Prince Lyrian played happily with the other synesthetic children who had been waiting for his return. The sight of the young prince teaching his friends new applications for the resonant stones filled Celine with satisfaction that went deeper than professional pride. You've changed my kingdom, King Aldrich said quietly, as they paused beside a fountain that had been built by his grandfather. Not just my son's life, but the entire understanding of how we approach difference and capability. I've simply shared knowledge that Omega families have preserved for generations, Your Majesty. The wisdom was always there. It just needed someone willing to listen. And that raises an important question, the king continued, his expression growing more serious. What other knowledge have Omega families been preserving? What other wisdom has been dismissed as superstition or folk medicine? It was a question Celine had been hoping he would ask, because the resonant stones were only the beginning of what Omega archives contained. Generations of women had preserved medical knowledge, agricultural techniques, diplomatic strategies, and social innovations that had been developed by people whose perspectives were shaped by positions outside traditional power structures. Your Majesty, there's quite a lot that could benefit the kingdom if it were given proper attention and resources. Then I think it's time we established a new position in the royal court, King Aldrich announced. An Omega knowledge keeper, someone responsible for researching, preserving, and implementing the wisdom that's been overlooked for too long. Your Majesty, congratulations, Selene Moonweaver. You're about to become one of the most important advisors in the kingdom. As they walked back toward the palace, where Prince Lyrian was demonstrating yet another innovative use for the resonance stones to his fascinated friends, Selene felt the weight of possibility settling around her like royal robes she had never expected to wear. The quiet Omega servant who had stepped forward with forbidden knowledge had become the architect of a transformation that would reshape the kingdom's understanding of wisdom, strength, and the value of different ways of knowing the world. And somewhere in the Omega archives, preserved by generations of women who had kept faith with the future, lay knowledge that could change everything, if someone was finally ready to listen with more than their assumptions and learn with more than their prejudices. The silence that had trapped a prince was broken forever, but the real revolution was just beginning. 15 years later, the coronation of King Lyrian I was unlike any ceremony in the kingdom's 1,000-year history, where previous coronations had been dominated by the thunderous roars of approval from gathered alphas and the ceremonial displays of dominance that marked traditional transfers of power. This celebration hummed with a different kind of energy altogether. Selene stood on the ceremonial platform beside the newly constructed resonance circle, a permanent installation that allowed multiple communication stones to amplify and connect with each other, creating networks of understanding that spanned the entire kingdom. At 18, Prince Lyrian had grown into exactly the kind of leader she had glimpsed in that 3-year-old child who could sense Master Willem's pain from across the palace grounds. "Are you ready, Your Majesty?" she asked through their private connection, using the title that still felt strange after years of friendship that had grown far beyond the original relationship between royal heir and Omega advisor. "I've been ready since I was old enough to understand what it means to serve people rather than rule them," Lyrian replied, his mental voice carrying the same gentle confidence that had made him beloved throughout the kingdom during his years as crown prince. "The question is whether they're ready for what comes next." They were the assembled representatives from every pack, territory, and settlement within the Crimson Crown's borders, along with dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms who had come to witness the coronation of the Silent King, a title that had begun as mockery but had evolved into something approaching reverence as Lyrian's methods proved their effectiveness again and again. The ceremony began not with fanfare, but with the soft harmonics of dozens of resonance stones activating in sequence throughout the Great Hall. The sound was barely audible to normal hearing, but the effect was immediate and profound, a sense of connection and shared purpose that flowed through the assembled crowd like water finding its level. "Today we witness the beginning of a new era," announced Elder Thorne, the court's chief ceremonial officer, his words carried both by voice and through the stone network, to ensure that every person present could participate fully, regardless of their sensory capabilities. An era where leadership is measured not by the volume of one's commands, but by the depth of one's understanding. Lyrian stepped forward to receive the crown that had been worn by his ancestors for 20 generations. But instead of the traditional moment where the new monarch would demonstrate their authority through a display of alpha dominance, something unprecedented happened. The young king knelt, not in submission, but in a gesture that invited every person in the Great Hall to share in the ceremony, rather than simply witness it. Through the resonance network, he opened his consciousness to the assembled crowd, allowing them to experience, however briefly and faintly, the synesthetic perception that had shaped his understanding of leadership. The effect was extraordinary. For a few moments, the gathered representatives could feel the emotional currents flowing through the room, could sense the hopes and fears and dreams that motivated their neighbors, could experience the deep connections that bound them all together as members of something larger than individual ambition. "I accept the crown not as a symbol of my authority over you," Lyrian said, his words resonating through multiple channels of communication, "but as a reminder of my responsibility to you. I promise to lead with wisdom rather than force, to listen before I speak, and to remember always that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than holding them down." As the crown settled onto his brow, a new design that incorporated resonance crystals alongside traditional metals and gems. Celine felt tears streaming down her face. The frightened child who had been dismissed as broken had become a king whose coronation was attended by representatives from the synesthetic communities that now existed in every major settlement, by Omega knowledge keepers whose wisdom was sought by rulers throughout the continent, and by traditionalists who had learned that change could strengthen rather than threaten the foundations of their society. "Long live the king," came the traditional cry, but it was followed by something new, a harmonic response that traveled through the resonance network, connecting every voice into a chorus that transcended individual sound to become something truly collective. After the ceremony, as the celebration moved to the palace gardens where the formal reception would continue throughout the night, Celine found herself in the communication archive, the vast library that had grown from her initial research into Omega-preserved knowledge. Thousands of texts, artifacts, and preserved wisdom traditions now filled chambers that had once housed dusty state papers and forgotten diplomatic correspondence. "Aunt Celine," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Princess Mira, now 15 and one of the kingdom's most gifted young diplomats, entered with her usual energy, though her expression carried the particular seriousness that came with important news. "There's someone here to see you." The someone turned out to be a delegation from the Eastern Kingdoms, led by an Omega woman whose bearing suggested both great learning and carefully controlled desperation. "Keeper Moonweaver," the woman said, offering the formal greeting that had become standard among the growing network of Omega scholars. "My name is Diana Stormwind, and I serve as advisor to Queen Regent Alara of the Sapphire Coast. We've come seeking guidance about a situation that our traditional methods cannot address." Celine gestured for them to sit in the comfortable chairs she'd arranged for consultations, noting the familiar mix of hope and skepticism that marked people who had exhausted conventional solutions. "How can we help? We have discovered a community of children, perhaps 24, who seem to share characteristics similar to those described in your published works about synesthetic perception," Diana explained. "But their abilities appear to be more extensive than what you've documented about Prince Lyrian and his contemporaries." "More extensive how?" "They appear to be able to sense and communicate with the natural environment directly. Plants, animals, weather patterns, even geological formations. Our healers insist it's impossible, but the evidence is undeniable." Celine felt her heart skip with excitement and possibility. She had suspected for years that Lyrian's gifts were part of a broader spectrum of alternative perception that had been suppressed or dismissed for so long that its full potential remained unknown. "Have you brought documentation of what you've observed?" Diana reached into her travel pack and produced a leather portfolio, thick with careful observations, detailed notes, and what appeared to be artistic representations of things that had no traditional visual equivalent. "We've also brought one of the children," she admitted hesitantly. "A 12-year-old named Marcus, who insisted on coming despite the journey's difficulty. He says the land itself has been calling him toward your kingdom, and that he needs to speak with the silent king who listens to everything." The description sent chills through Celine, because it suggested capabilities that went beyond anything she had encountered even in the most advanced synesthetic individuals. "Where is Marcus now?" "In the gardens with King Lyrian." They connected almost immediately upon meeting. The boy claimed he could feel the king's presence before they were even introduced. Through her own connection to the resonance network, Celine reached out to find Lyrian's signature among the many consciousness threads that flowed through the system. What she discovered made her gasp audibly. The network had expanded. Somehow, in the few hours since the coronation, new nodes had appeared, connection points that felt both ancient and entirely new, as if dormant capabilities were awakening throughout the kingdom. "Diana," she said urgently, "I think your visit represents something far more significant than a simple consultation. I think we're witnessing the emergence of abilities that have been sleeping for generations, waiting for the right conditions to manifest." As they made their way toward the gardens where an excited crowd had gathered around the new king and his young visitor, Celine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as one desperate attempt to help a misunderstood child had grown into a transformation that was reshaping entire kingdoms and revealing possibilities that challenged everything they thought they knew about human potential. In the garden, surrounded by the soft glow of resonant stones and the wonder of people experiencing entirely new forms of connection, King Lyrian and young Marcus sat together in animated conversation that required no words. The joy on both their faces spoke of recognition deeper than friendship, the meeting of kindred spirits who understood each other's unique place in a world that was finally ready to embrace its most extraordinary children. "The age of silence is ending," Lyrian said through the network, his thoughts reaching everyone connected to the resonance web. Not because the quiet ones are learning to be loud, but because everyone else is finally learning how to listen. As the celebration continued around them, and delegations from distant kingdoms began making plans for their own consultations with the Omega Knowledge Keepers, Celine understood that they stood at the beginning of something unprecedented in recorded history, an age where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where wisdom was valued regardless of its source, and where the most profound truths were often found in the voices that society had spent centuries teaching itself not to hear. The frightened child who had been dismissed as broken had grown into a king whose reign would be remembered not for the territories he conquered or the enemies he defeated, but for the minds he opened and the possibilities he revealed. And in the Omega archives, where knowledge waited patiently for recognition, lay the seeds of transformations yet to come, wisdom preserved by women who had faith that someday someone would be ready to listen with more than their prejudices and learn with more than their assumptions. The revolution that began in silence would change everything, and its echoes would resonate across generations yet to be born, carried forward by those who understood that the most powerful truths are often spoken in languages the heart recognizes, even when the mind cannot yet comprehend. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.